How's it going, everybody? You're back with Sam Shady Sports, and this is episode 3 of my USFL Head Coaching Breakdown. And I decided that this episode is going to be about Jeff Fisher. Um, I've been watching Jeff Fisher coach since as long as I can remember, as far as I was following the NFL back in the early 2000s when he was a prominent head coach. And despite all that, doing research on him, I still figured out a bunch of stuff I had never known about him. In fact, I sadly did not know that he was actually a coach on the Eagles at some point. So let's get into it. And hopefully, I can teach you guys some stuff about Jeff Fisher, maybe even change your opinion some. Probably not, though. Fisher actually started his career as a wide receiver. He played wide receiver and returned kicks in high school before moving to defensive back in college. He continued to return kicks at USC. And USC, he played around some of the best defensive players to ever grace the college game, and some guys that ended up in the Hall of Fame as NFL players. I'm not about to get into a list because we got a lot of information to cover, but there were many names that were very impressive, and I was shocked to see that he played with. Um, he was drafted by the Chicago Bears in the seventh round, and he went on to play 6 seasons in the NFL. 5 seasons in the NFL. The best part about that is he was on the Super Bowl winning Chicago Bears roster of the 1985 season. Um, Prior to that, though, in 1984, he actually tied a Chicago Bears team record with the most punt returns in a season with 57. Part of the reason he was able to do that is because he had another team record with 8 punts returned against the Lions. In 1985, he got injured. He had an ankle injury that caused him to land on injured reserve, and he wound up starting to coach as a defensive assistant under Buddy Ryan. I don't know if this was something that was planned by Fisher or he knew that his career was going to take a turn after this injury, or what really prompted him to getting to coaching, other than the fact that he decided that he wanted to be a productive member of the team despite his injury. Maybe it was Buddy Ryan who talked him into continuing as a coach and not a player, because he ended up following Ryan for many years. In 1986, Buddy Ryan was hired by the Philadelphia Eagles, and that's when Jeff Fisher joined the Eagles as well as a defensive backs coach. By 1989, just 3 seasons later, he was promoted to serve as the defensive coordinator for the Eagles, a role he only held for 2 seasons. Um, Normally, when you hear a defensive coordinator only held a role for 2 seasons, it's because they were terrible. That is not even remotely the case for Fisher. Under Jeff Fisher in 1989, the year I was born, actually, the Eagles led the NFL with 30 interceptions and 62 sacks, which is definitely nothing to sneeze at. In 1990, they followed up with the top ranked rush defense and was placing second in sacks once again. Um, After the 1990 season, Ryan was let go by Philly, and Fisher reunited with his college offensive coordinator, John Robinson. After 9 seasons in LA as the Rams head coach, Robinson was fired along with his coaching staff, meaning Fisher was looking for another job once again after just 1 season with the Rams as a coordinator. Um, Fisher was then hired to serve as the defensive backs coach in San Francisco under George Seifert. By extension, Fisher's kind of like a second cousin in the large family that we call the Bill Walsh coaching tree. He was It was vaguely on the tree, but only vaguely. He never really garnered any offensive knowledge from any of them, it seemed, as he was a defensive minded head coach and still is regarded as a defensive minded head coach. In 1994, Fisher moved on and was hired to replace Buddy Ryan as the defensive coordinator in Houston under Coach Jack Pardee. Pardee was basically hiring Fisher in an effort to keep the defense under the same scheme and build continuity, despite the fact that he just lost his defensive coordinator to a head coaching position. Fisher was the best way to do that because Fisher had served as his defensive coordinator and his defensive backs coach and a defensive assistant under him for, I think, a total of 7 seasons. Uh, so it just made a lot of sense. But by the end of the year, Jack Party's plan was actually terrible because Jeff Fisher had replaced him as the interim head coach. And he finished out the season with a 1-5 record. Which, if you ask me, I'm not quite sure why they decided to hire him for the full-time gig after that. Um, I was expecting some sort of impressive record, and then I look, and it's 1-5. Uh, I was a little too young to remember these seasons, so I don't necessarily remember how he got the text or the Oilers job, and then later relocated to the Titans. I just remember him being with the Titans forever, and I was kind of shocked to see that his run actually started with a 1-5 start. Um, Ironically, his first full season as a head coach, um, because I call him Mister 7-9, is his first season was a 7-9 record, which I actually laughed out loud when I saw that. It developed into a trend later on in his career, and he would actually finish his career with 12 different seasons between 6 and 8 wins out of 22 seasons as the head coach. Once again, how he managed to make it 22 years as a head coach, despite that, I have no idea. Um, but here we are. Uh, Basically, despite his 1995 season being a 7-9 year, uh, there was promise to be had. He had drafted Steve Mcnair. Steve Mcnair had flashed on film several times, and it was very apparent that Mcnair was going to be a good player for years to come. And this was actually to Fisher's benefit. I think that's a big reason why he stuck around in Tennessee and Houston for so long, is the fact that he hit on his first ever quarterback draft pick. And he built a roster that was impressive because the next season in '96, he drafted Eddie George, who was a Heisman winner coming out of college, and it looked like a sure thing, but nobody could have counted on his career turning out the way it did in Tennessee and, starting in Houston. Um, but just 3 seasons after he had acquired George, they were in the Super Bowl. Um, so nobody can really debate whether or not he was seeing talent in the players that he was pushing to be selected. Um, Despite showing up in that Super Bowl, we all remember how it went. Kevin Dyson caught a pass as time expired, and he was tackled less than a foot from the end zone. Uh, that play is forever known as the tackle. Um, After that, things never really rose to the level they had been with Fisher. It it was only another 9 seasons or so before everything had changed completely. Eddie George was gone. Steve Mcnair was traded. Vince Young was brought in to replace Steve McNair, and the cap implications of all the aging veterans that had been added prior to the 2005 season had become very apparent. It was time for a very slow and painful rebuild with Fisher still as the head coach. Uh, Due to the respect, so to speak, he had earned in Tennessee from Bud Adams and the other people involved with the ownership group. Despite several down seasons from 2005 on, Fisher managed to remain in Tennessee till 2010. The straw that broke the camel's back was a very public blow up between him and Vince Young on the sideline in a game, in which Vince Young left the game due to an injury and was not allowed to re enter the game. Vince Young then became very frustrated with Fisher, removed his pads, and in an Antonio Brown esque situation, threw them into the crowd and left the field of play. Vince Young was deactivated for the rest of the season, although he remained on the roster and ultimately was cut into 2010. After all that, it looked as if Fisher might actually survive through the drama that had happened with Young because they had opted to cut Young. 4 weeks after the season closed, the Titans decided that it was not going to progress with Fisher as they had hoped and decided to part ways and dubbed it as a mutually parting of ways, despite the fact that we all really know that Fisher was fired because of how poorly the last 6 to 7 years of his career in Tennessee went. Um, he spent a year out of football and then was hired as the St. Louis Rams head coach. I don't know if Kroenke hired him because he was a big name or because he had respect for him having played him in the Super Bowl. Whatever the truth may be, the tenure never worked out as anyone would have hoped. In his first season, he went 7-8-1, which was a 5-win improvement and garnered more respect and anticipation for his future seasons, thinking that the team would go up from there. However, in 2013, it was much the same, 7-9. 2014, it was 6-10. 2015, 7-9. And in 2016, he would finish with a 4-7 record. Now you're saying 4-7. That's not right. There's 16 games in the season. How did he finish with a 4-7 record? Well, I have to dive into a little bit of detail here because of how odd this whole situation was with the Rams. Uh, Fisher was the guy that was tabbed as the head coach a couple seasons before, but he ultimately was overseeing yet another relocation. Uh, the only two relocations that had happened from 1995 to 2016 in the NFL. On January 1st, the Rams were approved for the relocation to the LA. Things were going well to start the season. By October 2nd, the Rams, led by Case Keenum, were 3-1. By November 6th, a little over a month later, they had lost 4 games straight and sat 3-5. By November 13th, the following week, the Rams won another game with Keenum starting, making them 4-5. Despite this, the following week, November 20th, Jared Goff made his first career start. By December 4th, in 3 starts, Goff had led the offense to just 41 points, and Jeff Fisher was rewarded with a 2-year contract extension. Wait, what? I'm very confused at this point. So let's back this up a little bit. At this point, Jared Goff has started 4 games. He's produced 41 points. Doesn't take a math whiz to figure out that's a little over 10 points a game. Why is Fisher getting a contract extension when his team is at this point 4-9? Or sorry, 4-7, 4-6, something like that. 4-6. Sorry about that. Um, well, I don't think the Rams even know why he was getting a contract extension because by December 11th, after a 42-14 loss to the Falcons, he was fired a week after signing a 2-year contract extension. Like, what the hell is going on in LA? Does Kroenke know? Does Fisher know? Did anybody know? Because that was one hell of a sequence there. You go from giving your coach an extension after 4 straight losses, and then you turn around and fire him after a 5th loss. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Um, in 2017, Kroenke got slapped with a lawsuit from St. Louis and settled for $790 million. I thought this was very appropriate because they had to suffer through 3 7-9 seasons with Jeff and Fisher as the head coach. So why not sue Kroenke and settle for $790 million? It just seems appropriate. Uh, Jeff Fisher, during his tenure with the Rams, uh, showed that he was never going to progress past the point he was as a head coach. He is always going to be an average to slightly above average NFL head coach. But that's not to say he's not a good coach. He's a good coach. He's a good teacher. He's a good leader. There's a reason why he stayed as a head coach for 22 seasons in the NFL. That was not all a mistake. Were there indications that he was never going to get to the level he'd gotten in that Super Bowl run? Absolutely. And did the owners ignore it? Yes, they did. But Fisher was a very well respected coach in the NFL and has been for many reasons. He's always been the coach that's done the right things in terms of politics. He's very respectful. He doesn't go out of his way to bash anybody that he doesn't feel needs it. He didn't even really complain about the Vince Young situation in public until years after he left the Titans. So I think that showed what kind of man he was and what kind of respect he garnered around the league. And that's why he was around for so long. But he was also around for so long because he developed so many good players in all of his runs. No matter where you look, Steve Mcnair, uh, Eddie George, Samari Roll, there was Kevin Dyson, there was, man, so many I can't even think of all the names. But he developed a squad that garnered respect, and he developed a resume that garnered respect. Yet, despite all that, teams had written him off as a head coach in the NFL. And I don't know if he never received an offer or if he simply passed up on any offers to be a coordinator, but nothing ever came of it. He spent 4 seasons out of football entirely, and as early as 2 years ago was telling people in interviews that he hoped he ended up on a sideline again because he didn't feel he was done. So in 2021, he joined Tennessee State as an um, analyst slash consultant. He was basically just kind of hanging around and trying to help out the coaching staff. Um, in 2022, word began to start leaking that he would join the USFL. It was one of the worst kept secrets of the USFL. They've always tried to do this news in groups situation. But the thing is, Jeff Fisher's name was leaked as being involved with the league very early on, and he wasn't announced as a head coach until the very last announcement of head coaches. Um, it just seemed very odd. We all knew he was working with the league. We all knew he was going to serve some sort of role. Did some sort of falling out happen? Did some sort of rearrangement happen? Was it contingent on him coaching a certain team? I couldn't find any information on this. And quite honestly, I think it might have had something to do with the teams. I honestly believe that it made a lot more sense for him to be coaching the Houston Gamblers instead of the Michigan Panthers. I mean, let's be real. He spent 16 seasons in Tennessee, which had drawn fans from Houston, where he started his career as a head coach. It just made a lot of sense for him to return to where he began his career as an NFL head coach, as a USFL head coach. Maybe he wanted to pave a new path. I don't know what it was, but now he's with the Michigan Panthers, who have quickly become one of the most popular teams in the league based off Jeff Fisher's hiring, because we don't really have any other news other than Fisher's involved with the team and we have a logo. There's never been any player announcements yet. We haven't done the player selection meeting yet. Um, that's all we know. Jeff Fisher running the Panthers, and they're the most popular team at this point. Which brings me to my next point. Fisher is just 63 years old. He's been coaching since he was very young. He jumped right into NFL coaching, like I said, after he played a 5 season career as an NFL player. That's an asset for the USFL. All these relatively young yet experienced head coaches they were able to grab will bring the right level of teaching to develop these players to the next level, which is exactly what the USFL needs. It might be counterintuitive to think that the USFL wants coaches that are going to develop their players and help them leave to a larger league and better pastures, but that's actually exactly what you want, because you want the best of the best college players, for whatever reason, are trying to jump to the professional level but can't go to the NFL right away, to come to the USFL, like it was back in the day when so many big names played for the USFL that it was truly a competitor for the NFL back then. Now, I'm not saying they're ever going to get to that point. Obviously, I'm saying they need to use their ability to develop NFL caliber talent for other leagues to develop a fan base. But there are other ways that Fisher is going to help that. Fisher is likely never going back to the NFL. It doesn't matter how good he does in the USFL. The NFL has formed its opinion on him as a head coach. He's Mr. 7-9. It's not happening. So with that being said, he might actually be in the best possible position for him. He's coaching professional level football with a league that at least has 3 seasons of funding secured as of right now. So he's got at least 3 years with the team that he's with right now. Unless, I guess, they get purchased by an outside owner and decide Fisher's not the guy. Although I don't see that happening. Who are you going to hire with a better resume than Fisher for the USFL at this point? No. Which is exactly why he's such a huge hire for them. How else are you going to find a head coach that has 22 years of NFL coaching experience as a head coach and bring him to the league like this? You're not, because he's going to be in the NFL. Fisher is like a one-time, once-in-a-lifetime scenario for an upstart spring league like this. He is the exact kind of coach they should have sought out from the very beginning, and apparently did seek out from the very beginning. Much like Todd Haley. These are guys who are going to bring NFL fans to these broadcasts for these games because they're going to run NFL offenses. They're going to draw NFL level talent that is trying to break into the NFL because they know they're getting NFL level coaching. It just makes sense. On top of everything else that Fisher brings to the team as a head coach, part of the reason why he's so key for the USFL as a hire is his experience with the NFL competition committee that he was on up until 2016 when he left the NFL and he resigned. That is huge for the USFL because he can help them not only be a head coach but progress as a league going forward and help progress the competition level and how they address it going forward. Now, it's it, I don't know if they necessarily thought about that when they brought Fisher in. I would assume they did. Why else would they bring Fisher in so early on in the process without naming him a head coach? Was he going to serve as some other role up in the front office of the league somewhere? Maybe so. Maybe he was going to be the head of the competition committee. Maybe he is. I don't know. All we know right now is that he is the head coach and GM of the Michigan Panthers. We don't even know who's going to be on his squad yet. But we do know that there are going to be a lot of eyes on him and the Panthers to see how they pan out in this league. And I, for one, will be watching because I think he'll be very confused as to how he's going to rack up a 7-9 or 8-8 record when he only plays 8 games. Who knows? Just kidding. I really should stop joking at his expense, considering he's garnered much more respect in the field I'm trying to find respect in than I have. But with that being said, like I said, I do think Fisher is a great hire for the USFL, and I honestly think that he is likely going to be leading the best team in the league when everything's said and done. Um, he was a huge, huge hire for USFL, and he's going to end up being a huge win for the league over time. That's everything I've got for you today. I would love to hear your guys' opinions on Fisher being back in professional football. Um, what did you think about him getting fired? Did you think he deserved to be a head coach as long as he was? Do you think he's a good person to be in the USFL? Do you think he'll be successful? Or do you think he'll be a 500 coach in the USFL and end up flaming out there as well? Uh, it really could go anyway. Although I have faith that he's going to end up being one of the more successful coaches in the USFL. Go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, share this to your friends if you liked what you heard, and until next time, friends.